One of the great things about Quasar's components is that it does a really good job of making basic tasks simple by giving you all of the flexibility that you need to basically customize the components to the nth degree. And there is no better example of that than the QTable component. So this is going to be a little bit of a ride. I've tried to cover the main things, but please understand that there is so much to this component and it just wouldn't all fit in the scope of this video. So do spend some time playing around with the docs and understanding this component because it is unbelievably powerful. So let's begin. Q-table, we'll start off with that, and then we'll say here some rows for the data that we actually want. This is going to be an array, and then I'll put inside of there some objects with my data. First, we'll have an ID of 1, and let's just copy paste a few of those down. It's good to have an ID, and I'll mention why in a moment. You want to have something that's unique in your data properties. You don't have to, but it's good to have. So there we go. We've got a very basic start here, and now we can add in here name, and I'm going to say ldiebold, and then let's add a name in there, and let's do my two dogs. So Panda and Lily, and let's add my girlfriend as well because we are one big happy family. And 4 will be Shannon. Save that. Oh, I've forgotten a few commas there. And there we go. It's automatically going to put the ID and the name in for us. It's pretty cool how it just figures that out. And all we had to do is put in the row data. I love it. So let's come down here now, Alt-click so I can select all those places, comma, enter, and also put in an email. Luke@ldiebold.com. And then Panda can be panda@ldiebold.com, Lily@ldiebold.com, and then we'll do Shannon. But let's change that from ldiebold to QuasarCast. That's probably a bit more relevant. And there we go. The data just goes straight in there. So it's super easy to do something basic. However, we want to customize a bit further. So let's explore. If we add a title in here, we can change the title of our table. So this could be accounts. And that just gives us a sensible way of displaying the title. Another thing we can do is start customizing the columns. And this is where a lot of that initial power for the QTable component comes from. So let's throw some objects in here for all of the columns. The first piece of data will be the name. And the name of this column will be the ID. Let's give it a label. And let's say identification. And just save that to see what we've got so far. All right, so we've got that title, but notice that there is no data in there. So how do we go about displaying the data now for this column? Well, we can now say the field, and the field for that is ID. All right, so this field value here needs to match up with the field in the object. All right, so ID here matches ID for each of these objects. That's how it's being spat out correctly there. All right, moving on. We can also make field a function. So we could say, for example, value, and then say value, and we might even change that to row to be a bit more specific. Row.id, that's giving us the exact same thing, but we can now, for example, turn this into a template string like so, and then say ID, and there we go. We can format it a little bit differently if we like. So that's pretty cool. Let's change it back to ID. I can also align it differently. So align it to the left side. Or you might want to center this. This is particularly useful when you want to throw your own buttons in there, for example, and you want the button to be centered within that column. So that's really good to know. How about we leave that on left? I think that makes more sense. We can also make it sortable. So sortable is equal to true, and ID isn't a great example for this, so let's go from ID to the email. Change the label equal to email, change the field equal to email, and save that. And there we go. Notice that when I hover over this now, I get this little arrow, and I can sort it by the email. And by the way, you can change the sort function, but we're not going to do that in this video because I want to keep it at least a little bit pithy. All right, next we can add some classes in there. So how about we add a class of background-blue and see what that looks like? All right, bit ugly, but it works. We can also come in here and say the style, and we could say, for example, maybe we'll add a border to the bottom. And how about 2 pixels, solid, green? Oh gosh, that looks atrocious, doesn't it? So let's get rid of the class and see what that looks like. Slightly better. So that's something else we can do. We could also say header classes. And so this allows us to specify the class for this header here, of course. And a good example of that might be background, gray, maybe a 7 would be good. And let's set the text equal to white there. There we go. So we can style that to our heart's content. We could also say, for example, header style, of course, and then say the font size of that header is going to be equal to 1.2 EM. And that's just going to make it a little bit bigger. So there's some of the functionality that we get out of Quasar's columns. And there is even more to this. Once again, Quasar makes it very simple to get up and running with this component, but it allows you to tap in wherever you need to. Super, super cool. Now let's paste this down and add in the name as well. In fact, we might even add the name first. That probably makes more sense, doesn't it? So let's say name, and then here we'll say name as the label with a capital N. That's going to use the name field. We'll align that to the left, and I think we can probably get rid of the styling now that I've demonstrated that. All right, save it, and there we go. That's a pretty good example to play around with. Now, one thing I want to point out before we move on, you want to make sure you have a row key. And a row key basically allows Quasar to uniquely identify rows in your table. And this helps Quasar with certain components, and it also helps to keep this component fast. So you want to have a row key, which is going to be a unique identifier for each of the objects for these rows. So let's say here row-key, and I'm going to set that to ID. And that's basically me saying, hey, Quasar, the row key of ID, all right, so the ID of all of these properties here, of all of these objects, is going to be unique. All right, so that's something to point out. It's going to help you moving forward, and it'll allow you to avoid issues. So one of those things that you want to remember to add in. What else can we do? How about visible columns? This is particularly useful if you want to hide and show things depending on user input. So you could say visible columns here. And how about we just make it so that only the name is visible? So save that. Oh, that needs to be a string. And there we go. And then, of course, we could put in email there. And by the way, this needs to match up with the name, not the field, the name. That's an important thing to remember when you're basically trying to pluck things out of the columns. You want to make sure you're using the name property and not the field property. Okay, so now we've got that. Let's just put the name back in there as well so that this example is a bit more full and move on to something else. We can also check if it's loading. So let's say loading is equal to true. So if you're fetching something from the server, you might be modeling something there that checks whether or not it's fetching. And that's just going to give us this loading bar. So we can get rid of that now. Otherwise, it'll annoy us. What else can we do? We can change the separator. Now, this is particularly useful where I work, because where I work, we often have a lot of data that we need to manage and display. And so by setting the separator equal to cell, it just adds that little extra bit of bordering and makes the differentiation between the data a little bit more obvious. So usually you don't need that, but if you have a lot of data, you might want to use cell there. And you can also say vertical. Or if you like, if you want something that's like really nice and sort of clean cut, you can say none there, and that works too. All right, so that's the separator. What else can we do? Oh, this next thing is really cool. I couldn't believe that this was so ridiculously easy to do with Quasar. Check it out. We can say v-model selected is equal to selected. All right, so we're going to model selected within this component. All right, and now I can say selected is equal to, let's pull ref out of here. We're just going to model some data using the comp API, return an object there, and then we'll say const selected is equal to a reference, and we might just make that false by default. Return that here. Check if this is working. Looks like I might have done something wrong. Oh, I think selected doesn't want to be a Boolean. So let's just make that blank here. Refresh the page. Right, so in order to do selected, we actually need to add one more bit of data here and say selection is equal to single. And there we go. So now I can select these super easily. How amazing is that, that we got all of that extra functionality and all we had to do really is add these 2 lines of code and actually model something. Insane. We could also just say multiple here. And now we've got multiple selection. How cool is that? And we can toggle it on and off really easily. And just to give you an idea of what this data looks like, let's whack that inside of a pre-tag and display selected. Save it and toggle some of these on and off. And there we go. It just toggles the object just like that. Super, super cool. All right, let's get rid of that. It's messing up our styling. What else can we do? Well, we'll get rid of this, so we're back at a more basic example. And another thing we have access to is pagination. And the pagination for Quasar's table component is out of this world. I'm only going to show you a few things. So let's say pagination is equal to an object. And the first thing I'll say here is sort by. And I just wanted to show this. In pagination, we can say, for example, sort by the name. And now it's automatically going to sort by the name by default. So if I refresh the page, once again, it's automatically sorted it by the name for us simply by adding sort by. So that's something that's kind of cool to know. We can also say here, rows per page. How many rows are we going to show per page here? Let's change that to 1. And now we only get 1 row per page, and we can just press the next and left button there, or go to the very end, or go to the very start. We could also make it something like 2. Really, really cool and super easy to play around with. Another thing we can do is change the default page. So if we set that to 1, we'll get this first page. But if we set that to 2, then by default, it'll take us straight to page 2. So that's kind of cool to know. And also, you can model this piece of data. So that's kind of cool that you can be outside of the table component and model the data yourself here. What else can we do? Well, we can actually add another property here to say what all of these menu options are for the records per page. Let's have a look at what that would look like. Records per page options is equal to an array. So let's just add the colon there. And then let's say, how about 1, 2, 5? Let's have a look at that. Oh, and it's not records per page, it's rows per page. Let's have a crack at that. And there we go. Now it's just got those options available. And it's good to know that 0 means all. So now when we click on this drop down, we can select all there. Super, super cool. And also note that Quasar handles server-side pagination beautifully. So check the docs out if you want to dig deeper into how you can do server-side pagination, just in case you're like searching from the other side or you're filtering things using your server. You want to be able to say next and handle pagination through the server. That can be super handy to play around with, especially if you end up with performance issues having to pull down all of your data all at once. All right, moving on. Let's explore some slots now. I'm going to make that not a self-closing tag, close it there, and then we can say template and start playing around with some slots. And the first one I want to show you is the body slot, which basically allows us to customize every single row however we like. So let's say hashtag body is equal to props. We're going to yank the props out of there. And now let's come down here and say Q-TR. So that's a Quasar table row. And we want to send through the props there, okay? That's important. Make sure that you don't miss that, otherwise some styling won't work. Let's add Q-TD now, and we want to have a key for our table data, and the key is going to be equal to name. All right, so now let's display the name, like so, props.row.name. In fact, before I dig into that, how about I comment that out, and let's just do a pre-tag and spit out props and see what that looks like. All right, so these are all the properties we get. We get access to all of our columns, the page index, but the one that we're going to be most interested in is the row. And notice there's that key that we set before. That's also sitting inside of here. All right, so we want to yank out the row. So let's say here, props.row, and we want to get the name. So props.row.name. Get rid of that pre-tag, save it, and there we go. We've now mapped this data cell here But what's cool about this is we have total control over this now. We can do whatever the hell we want. We could say, for example, let's turn it into a Q-chip. Save it, and now it's a chip. We could make it so that this is a button that opens a dialog. So let's just try Q-button there. Or we could do anything, can basically be slotted into here using this tactic. It's really, really cool. This is in fact what I do for almost all of my table components and gives me insane flexibility. I'll give you another hot tip. You could say, for example, Q-input and then have an input field that updates on the fly, and then you could have a live table component like something like Excel. And if you are doing that, you might want to say borderless here to get rid of the border on that input. So that's just a cool tip and something that I often do with my components. All right, back to that original example though. Next, we want to have the email. So let's just copy this, paste it down, and then we'll change that to email. Oh, and I've forgotten one thing here. So check this out. If I scroll up here to visible columns and I get rid of name, notice that didn't work. It got rid of the title, but not the row. So why isn't that working? The reason is, with our table row, we need to send through the props, but we also need to do it for each of the individual table cells. This is very important. You need to have the key and you want to send through the props, all right? And that's going to make it work now. So notice that it's just showing the email and we can bring back in the name. I think that was the first one there. So let's just throw it in here. Sweet. Okay. Moving on. What else can we do? Well, you might not need all of this extra functionality and you might not need the entire power of taking over the row. I'll show you what I mean. So if you want to say, for example, the background of the row is green and you want to have control over that table row to the nth degree, then this is the way to go. However, there's another slot available to us, which is really, really cool. Check this out. Let's go ahead and get rid of all of this. And then change this to body-cell. So we want to target a particular cell in the body. And the cell we want to target is the name. All right. In fact, let's change that to email because I want to demonstrate something here. The email here needs to match up with whatever is the name of the column. All right. So the name of the column is email. So that needs to match up with that. Not the field, the name. All right, that stumped me a couple of times in the past. So now we can say here Q-TD, and then once again, we don't want to forget the props. So props is equal to props, and then you can just throw directly in here props.row.email. Now, the cool thing about that is we've only done a template for the specific cell that we wanted to do a template for. So we didn't have to do an entirely new template for the name. We're basically just targeting this specific cell. Super, super handy because it means the rest of the stuff is automatic and we don't have to do all that extra markup if we don't have to. And once again, total control here. We can make that a Q-button, an input field, a checkbox. You can do whatever you want there. You have total control. All right, but I want to go back to this rows example to show you one more really cool thing, which is expandable rows. Quasar has made expandable rows insanely simple to do. Check it out. First of all, I'm going to come up to columns here. Where is it? There we go. And I want to add a new column. And this is going to have a name equal to expand. And then we'll set the label equal to expand. And then we'll set a line equal to center because this is going to be a button and I want that button to be centered. Oop, we've got that gross green. Let's go ahead and get rid of that. All right, there we go. So we've added a new column here called expand, but remember we're using visible columns here. So let's just go ahead and get rid of that so that expand starts showing now. All right. However, it's not showing properly because we need to add in Q-TD to basically cover expand. So let's just make that a button, Q-button, and we'll give that an icon equal to, add is probably a good icon for that. And then we can say flat and round just so it fits nicely in the table. And I might even make it dense as well. There we go. So now we've got this button here, and I want to make it so that when I click on that button, it shows me another row underneath that I can basically just put whatever I want in there. So if I want to show extra information for this row, I can click on there and show that extra information. Or it could even be a whole bunch of sort of sub rows that show, I don't know, other names for Panda, like a whole bunch of other nicknames she's got and other emails that Panda has. So, you could do some cool stuff like that. Anyway, let's actually implement this. Next, we want to make it so that when you click on this button, then props.expand is equal to the opposite of what props.expand currently is. So basically, we're just toggling expand on and off. That's not going to do anything yet. So how do we add the extra row underneath here? Well, you literally just add another extra row in there. Super intuitive. So now this can be our expanded row. We can just say in there, expanded, save it, and there we go. We can toggle that on and off by saying here v-show is equal to props.expand. And there we go. We can toggle it on and off. However, the styling sucks. So what can we do if we basically want to have a section that takes up the entire row there? And it kind of displays as a row itself. I'll show you what I mean. We can say Q-TD here, and then I can take that text and then whack it in there. All right. So that's looking a little bit better, but what if we want this cell to take up the entire row? Well, we can simply say colspan is equal to 100%. And then that's going to span that column all the way over to the end, so the styling is correct now. And then I'm pretty sure I might be able to say like text-center there. Center. And let's have a look at that. Cool. Yeah, so now you've basically just got this area that you can do whatever you want with. Super, super cool. Now, there's one more thing I want to show you before finishing up this video. Another template that allows you to hook into the top and bottom row, but not actually the top and bottom row, before the top row and before the bottom row, to be specific. I'll show you what I mean. If we say here template, oh, I spelled that wrong, template, and then we say here hashtag top dash row, then we can say here top row. So let's just see if that works. And there we go. We can hook into before the top row. And notice that if I go next and previous here between the data, that's still going to display. And we can also do the same thing for the bottom row. We can hook into the bottom row there. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, this is particularly useful for summarizing data. In fact, it's insanely useful for that. So now you could say Q-TR to basically fully flesh this out, Q-TD, and I'll copy paste that down a few times. So basically, this is just a blank row now. And if I want to hook into email and do like a summary here, then you could say, for example, I don't know, the number of emails, so the total number of emails. Or maybe the total number of unique emails, because maybe in this application, you can have more than one email for an account, and you want to just show the unique emails here. Silly example, but you could just put the number 5 in there, and now you've got like a sort of a summary row at the bottom here. This works better when your table is dealing with numbers, but you get the point. And then you could, for example, say class is equal to background-green-1, just to make this stand out a little bit and show that it is different and it's a row that stands on its own. So there you go. An insanely cool component. And honestly, I have just scratched the surface. I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that are possible with this component. But take the time to dive into it because it is out of this world. So simple to use by default, but remarkably flexible. We have done some crazy, crazy stuff with tables at the place where I work, and I have never hit a brick wall with this component. And if there is one thing I hate about frameworks and libraries, is that they limit you sometimes, and you end up hitting a brick wall, and then there's stuff that you just can't do. One of the most amazing things about Quasar is that you don't run into those brick walls. It's remarkable because the creators of Quasar have thought so much about slots and attributes and different properties, stuff like that, and they've handled it so remarkably well. All of these components are extendable to the nth degree. So I absolutely love it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I absolutely loved preparing it and making it for you. I'll see you in the next one where we explore something else. Bye for now.